Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Congressman Kevin Kiley. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. This month marks 1 year since devastating wildfires absolutely ravaged the Los Angeles area, burning thousands of acres and causing tens of billions of dollars worth of damage. In the immediate aftermath, a star-studded Fire Aid benefit concert with performances by artists including Lady Gaga, Rod Stewart, and Green Day raised $100 million for relief efforts. But a report recently released by House Republicans on the Judiciary Committee alleges Fire Aid misused some of those donations. So to start off the conversation, what made you want to look into Fire Aid in the first place?
So we heard a lot of concerns about Fire Aid earlier last year, and in particular coming from folks even on the ground, the Pacific Palisades Community Council, among others. And there were concerns about where did all of this money go? You had this incredible outpouring of generosity in the wake of these just devastating, tragic fires that left so many victims. But then we heard reports that none of this money was actually going directly to the victims themselves. People were asking where did it go? So that's why I asked for this investigation, is just to get transparency, to get people answers. And so now we have this report from the Judiciary Committee, and I've also obtained documents from Fire Aid that lists every single grant recipient, and people can see that on my website.
And I want to talk about specifically what's in this report. I've read the whole thing. It's 10 pages, and it's entitled this: Fire Aid apparently misused charitable donations by funding illegal aliens, podcasters, and nonprofits' administrative costs. That's quite the charge there. So what specifically did you find?
Yeah, so we looked through all of the organizations that received grants. And, to be fair, there were a number that were legitimate organizations, food banks, groups that clearly are doing things that could be of support to fire victims. But then you had some more unusual ones, like you just listed. Like you had one organization whose main mission seemed to be about voting rights, which might be a laudable mission, but what exactly does it have to do with fire relief? And that donation was actually returned, or that grant was returned. You had grants that went to podcasters. You had one that went to certain kind of planting techniques. You had some that went to groups that do political advocacy. And so this raised questions. Well, were these funds really being distributed fully in a way that aligns with the intent of the donors, the purpose of the concert, and the needs of the victims?
And to that point, I think when anyone donates to any type of relief, they want that money to go to the people who need it, right? The victims. So I'm assuming you asked these organizations, I'm assuming you asked Fire Aid about that. What specific answers did you get?
Well, they maintain that the funds were distributed to groups that then used them to support victims, and that clearly was true. For many organizations that receive funding. But again, the problem is twofold. Number one, in terms of how the concert was advertised and the pitch that was made to donors during the concert, the impression that many people got was that the funding was going to go directly to the victims, and that was not the case. And then second, of those groups that received funds, there were some who clearly did not have any sort of direct connection to the mission of the concert, which was to support fire victims. And so we listed some of the examples we found of that. But by contrast, I saw a post from Andrew Gruel, who's a well-known chef in Southern California, who said that he worked with folks that organized $500,000 in aid immediately that went directly to victims without having any established infrastructure. And so his point was, why couldn't Fire Aid, this massive organization that came together with a lot of institutional, type people involved, why couldn't they have done a better job of getting support directly to victims?
And I think you quoted one of the MCs saying something to the effect of all the money raised will directly go to the people who need it. But how specifically would you have wanted to see this money doled out? Would you want to see it something like stimulus checks where in COVID people were just given money directly?
Yeah, I think that, there's not necessarily one right way to do it. I think the example I just gave you of Andrew Gruel, he said that his group was able to get support directly to people. So sure, it could have come in the form of direct payments where necessary, or to in any number of ways, or maybe and I'm not even criticizing necessarily the way that they set it up. If you have donations that are then going to nonprofits that are able to do some of this work in a more efficient way, then maybe that makes sense in some circumstances. But I think that the concern that people raised was that, well, that's not how this was advertised at the time when people were generously making these donations. And then months after the concert, you had the Pacific Palisades Community Council itself writing a letter saying we're not really seeing the impact from any of these funds right here in our own community.
I want to talk about the scope here and what you're thinking in terms of that, because obviously I want to start off by saying any misuse of funds meant to go to a victim of disaster relief, that's not good, right? Obviously that's bad. But let's follow the money trail and talk about just how big you think this was, because I know you said some of the relief you think that went to great places. But if you add up the numbers highlighted in the report, the committee's saying that more than $1.25 million was misused. Obviously, that number should be zero. But is that a small percentage of the amount that was dispersed? Because so far, the amount that was dispersed was $75 million. So would you characterize the misuse as more of an outlier? Or do you think that the majority of the money went directly to help victims? What does that really look like for you?
Yeah, so that was part of the goal of our investigation, is to figure out how much of a problem this was, what the scale of it was, because we had heard some examples that were very troubling. So we wanted to look into that and see what the full picture was. So we're still actually, the investigation is ongoing. This is just an interim report. So we're now looking more specifically at some of the organizations and exactly what they used the funds for, because we've sort of only gotten, the first layer of distribution where we know what Fire Aid did with the money and what the organizations they gave it to, but we don't necessarily know how those organizations use the funds. And we already actually have some evidence of funding being used for staff salaries, administrative expenses, things that did not constitute direct fire relief. So I don't think we have a specific answer to your question just that yet, other than to say that we know that there were some funds that appeared to not be used in a way that was not aligned with donor intent, but that there were certainly quite a bit of the funding that went to organizations that at least do the sort of work that could assist fire victims.
Back in September, Fire Aid released the findings from an outside law firm's investigation into the way that they used the funds. They said no funds were misused and 100% of the funds to date went to the community. And the Los Angeles Times conducted a similar investigation. They had similar findings, and they said this: Fire Aid was an urgent lifeline in the worst of the disaster and beyond. What are your thoughts on those investigations?
Yeah, so I've actually posted their report on my website as well, along with all of the underlying documents. And now we have the report from the Judiciary Committee. It's important to note that the Fire Aid report was an internal investigation. So what we were doing through the Judiciary Committee was an outside independent investigation. But my goal here is to provide maximum transparency so people can come to their own conclusions, so they can see the differing conclusions reached in these reports that are posted on my website. You can look at the underlying documents as well. And hopefully, moving forward, there will be some lessons here in terms of the distribution of the remaining Fire Aid funds and in terms of how these situations are handled in the future.
I do want to note that Fire Aid's investigation was from an outside law firm, but CBS reported that your colleague, Congressman Brad Sherman, he represents the Palisades area. He said that this was a unipartisan report, and Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee, quote, chose not to involve me or Judy Chu or any of the Democrats on the relevant committee. They seem to hate the organization because maybe some of the money, a small portion, went to undocumented immigrants. What's your response to his claim there?
Well, there was some that went to undocumented immigrants. It seems that's part of the report that was issued by the committee, in addition to some of the other issues that the report noted. I think that this report was done by the Judiciary Committee. I just requested it, so I wasn't involved in actually writing the report or anything like that. I think it was done in the same way that they do all of their reports, and they aim to get documents from the organization and then draw conclusions from there. So that's one of the powers we have as a committee is the committee is able to request these documents, if necessary, subpoena these documents. And so, as I said, my goal for this, I think that there was, obviously incredible generosity by the donors involved here. And I think there were, worthy nonprofits who received funding. So my goal has been just to provide the transparency that people need to be able to reach their own conclusions.
And FireAid's progress report back in September indicated that $25 million still had to be dispersed. They said that they were going to disperse that by the end of the year, but your report says that the money still needs to be doled out. So how do you want to see that $25 million be spent? And do you specifically want oversight on that? Do you want it to be in a different way or manner than FireAid dispersed that $75 million?
I think they should probably just be very, very careful to make sure that the distribution of the funds is done in a way that meets the needs of the victims. And as I said before, there were a number of nonprofits that received funds that clearly were worthy organizations. I think there's many people who would say that if you could get the funding to the victims directly, then that might be optimal to assist them in their rebuilding process. But at the very least, there should be, vetting to assure that the sort of questionable uses highlighted in the report don't recur. And notably, in at least one circumstance, the grant was actually returned to FireAid because of what was uncovered. So hopefully we'll not see those sort of mistakes repeated in the future. I think there are some lessons to be learned here. I think that also there are lessons to be learned if there's a federal relief package, which I continue to advocate for, along with all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in California, to assure that those funds actually get to victims.
And what do you think is the biggest lesson to be learned here? Because unfortunately, there's a high likelihood that another disaster is going to strike California, perhaps even the LA area again. So what do you think the biggest lesson needs to be learned here?
I think it's that you need to put the victims and their needs front and center. And so, for example, the fact that the Pacific Palisades Community Council had to write a letter to the organization several months after the disaster saying, we're not really seeing any impact here. What's going on with the money? It seems like they should have been involved from the get-go in terms of advising, at the very least, the organization on how those funds were distributed. And maybe another lesson is just to be really straightforward when you're asking for these donations in terms of how they're going to be used. I think that's one of the reasons people felt a little bit that didn't line up, is that there were these pitches made that this is money that's going to the victims, and that wasn't exactly what happened.
And I know that you said that this is just an interim report. So I'm curious, what questions do you still have about this money, and what's next in terms of this investigation?
Yeah, so we've written some follow-up letters to different grantees and just asking what they used the money on to make sure that it was used in a way that as intended. As I noted, we've found some examples, or the committee found some examples of where apparently these funds were used for things like administrative expenses, salaries. So that's just kind of the next layer of review, is looking at it on that level.
Congressman, I appreciate the time today. You are welcome back anytime. Thanks for joining me.
Of course. Thanks for having me.